So now we'll turn to the presentation of the 2015-16 proposed budget. This is for the fiscal year that starts on October 1st. This will be a high-level overview. We'll go pretty quickly for the sake of time. There'll be another presentation on July 20th as well. So there'll be another opportunity for you to hear what's contained in the recommendations for next year's fiscal 2015-16 budget. So with that, I'll get started. The budget for the fiscal year starting October 1st is making it count. We went into this budget season with the idea that every single dollar, which is limited, obviously we don't have infinite resources, needs to make an impactful benefit to the community on a lasting basis. And so that was basically the driving force behind all the recommendations that we'll share with you this morning. In terms of an overview, we'll discuss the highlights contained in the 15-16 budget. We'll touch on CIP and infrastructure. There will be another study session held specifically on that topic, so I'll just go over that at a high-level way. The status of the general fund reserve, we'll give you an update on that. A discussion of unfunded liabilities, which is always a major topic that impacts the budget, so we'll get into that. We'll discuss a little bit state budget impacts and how they'll affect this fiscal year's budget, and then an overview of the budget calendar. In terms of making it count, one of the things that impacts cities and counties and every government at every level is making decisions based on short-term resources and not really having a longer-term outlook. The leadership here at the city, our city council, and also at the executive team level, we definitely have a forward-thinking approach. We usually try to develop recommendations that have a lasting impact that we feel are going to be sustainable in the long run, so that we're not dealing with structural deficits from one year to the next. And so what we've tried to do in these budget recommendations is maximize the limited resources to fund the areas needing it most, and especially based on council feedback, so public safety, quality of life programs, financial sustainability, and infrastructure. So where is the 15-16 proposed budget in terms of funding sources? The all funds budget is $344 million. This is a very slight increase of less than 1% from the current year adopted budget, and it's primarily due to a new grant in the public works arena associated with hazmat reduction and pollution remediation. And so pretty much a stable all funds budget. And for those of you in the audience that are new to budgeting, all funds is the general fund and all of the city's enterprise funds. So water, sewer, refuse, etc. The general fund, which is the part of the budget that we tend to focus on the most because it can be spent on anything and it's not a restricted source of funds, totals $216.5 million. That's a $6.6 million increase, or about 3% from the current year adopted budget. So modest growth and slight to modest growth in those categories. In terms of the general fund highlights, you have 14-15 adopted budget versus the 2015-16 proposed. You'll see that general fund revenues are experiencing, or we're projecting that we'll experience a modest growth there to $216.5 million. In the current year, we did use set-asides, $3.4 million specifically for the development and construction of the senior center. And those were set-asides that were specifically cobbled together from prior year ending surpluses. And so we set those aside for the purpose of helping to finance the senior center. We will have spent that down in 2014-15. But in the 15-16 budget, there are no set-asides used to finance any construction. And so we have just general fund revenues of $216 versus general fund expenses of an equal amount for a balanced budget. So again, the budget for 15-16 is a balanced budget. It shows about a 4.5% general fund revenue increase. In addition, there is a 2% labor adjustment that is reflected for full-time employees only in the baseline that's been being presented to the council. It also includes fixed cost increases that cannot be avoided. For example, PERS, and we'll get into more specifics in terms of the dollar values here. But PERS increases, workers' compensation, insurance premiums have also gone up, and utilities. Am I doing right? No, that's clear. The equipment replacement budget has also been increased by $500,000 for a total of $5 million. This is an area where we're always struggling for resources, and our equipment replacement, we usually get more in requests than we have funding available. And then another major highlight of the budget is increased funding and staffing for public safety and related capital equipment and technology investments of about $4 million. So in terms of our resources and the amount of money that we have to play with, what's contained in the general fund revenue? Our largest category is property tax, as you'll see here, at about $84 million. Sales tax is another major category, followed by utility users tax. We also have good growth in our transient occupancy tax. That revenue category has reached one banner year after another, which is great. So our tourism and convention business is still booming, which is good. And so we're able to project about $216.5 million in revenue for next year. In terms of specific year-over-year growth projections for property tax, it's about a $4 million increase. TOT at about $1.5 million. Sales tax is an increase of $4.4 million. It's important to note that that includes a one-time accrual of $2 million that's associated with the state unwinding the infamous triple flip, which I won't get into the details of, but it is a one-time funding source from the state of about $2 million, and that accounts for almost half of the projected growth in sales tax, but it's not recurring, so it won't happen again in 16-17. And then in some revenue categories, we are experiencing a decline from current year. In licenses and permits, it's not that development isn't still going on. It is. It's a matter of timing as to when permits are pulled and plan checks are done, etc. And so from the current year base, which reflected even more activity, it reflects a reduction. Gas tax transferred to the general fund, which is a pretty reliable source of revenue for many, many years. That's transferred $900,000 and eliminated due to state cuts. So that was a surprise, and that's recurring from what I can tell. And then the new water restrictions will also have an impact on our utility users tax revenue, which goes into the general fund based on water consumption. And so we're projecting a decline of about 20%, slightly over that for water utility users tax revenue. On the expense side, these are the main highlights. We have about $10.3 million in expenditures once you remove one time. So if you recall, the current year, the budget was 209.9, yet we did have about 3.5 in one time. So the starting base for next fiscal year was 206.2 million, and then we built upon that. This is just a high-level summary. There are hundreds and hundreds of lines of ins and outs, but these are the main categories. You'll see that the CalPERS increases of $3 million are one of the largest categories in addition to the 2% labor adjustment. On the CalPERS side, 2015-16 represents the first year of a 5 to 8 year ramp up in PERS costs that we have no control over. And that's not due to benefit enhancements, it's not due to additional staff, it is due to the fact that CalPERS has changed its funding methodologies for their plans. And so CalPERS has developed 4 different new strategies for making sure that statewide all of the pension plans are better funded. And so they're requiring more contributions from all of the employers into the plans. 15-16 represents the first year of that ramp up. And so it's a pretty significant cost at $3 million. Merits and skill pays that employees have become eligible for from the current year to next year is about $500,000. Some workers' compensation increases are factored in. Our utilities they were flat for about 3 years, but they're increasing again, so there's a $400,000 adjustment there. 2 police officer positions were built into the base months ago in terms of developing the budget, so that's included. Debt service and some tax sharing agreements that we have with some of our business partners are also increasing. We discussed the equipment replacement. Department supplementals, we had $10 million in requests from departments for increased funding, and we're able to fund about $1.5 to $2 million. There's some other items spread out in these other categories. And so, as you can see, there was much more need and many more requests than there was funding available. But all told, this is how you get to the $16.5 million expense budget for next fiscal year. So now for the recommendations in the budget by strategic planning goal. In the public safety area, About 53% of the general fund is dedicated to public safety. That is for police, fire, and marine safety. So you can see here in the pie chart, more than half of the resources in the general fund are for public safety services and programs, with the remaining departments here comprising the rest. So non-departmental, which is the next largest category, is basically debt service for bonds and utilities and citywide costs that don't relate to a particular department, followed by public works at about 10% of the budget, community services at about 4%, and then all of the other departments range between 3% and less than 1% here. In terms of public safety, we're really excited about the proposal in the police department in particular. Through a creative funding approach, we'll be able to add the presence, the equivalent of 5 police officers back into sworn and patrol-related duties. This is accomplished through a two-pronged approach. First, as mentioned in the earlier slide, the budget adds funding for 2 police officer positions. And then here is where the creative strategy comes in. It also adds funding for 3 community services officers, which will thereby free up 3 police officers to patrol-related activities. And so the combination of this creative funding approach for 2 officers and 3 community services officers will essentially add 5 more police officers to sworn or patrol-related duties. There's also a recommendation to increase police dispatch operations by 2 positions. And we also implemented a commensurate reduction in the overtime budget. So we could reduce overtime by bringing on the additional staff for a net neutral effect there. The budget also adds $50,000 in the fire department for a new standard recovery valuation. It permanently increases the junior lifeguard program funding by about $50,000 to improve the instructor to student ratios and make sure that the youth are safe.
Does that correspond with an increase in fees for the junior lifeguard?
The increase in fees for the junior lifeguard program was actually implemented in 2013, but we didn't permanently adjust the budget for the
So, but that's offset.
It is offset. It is offset. And we also provide funding for a new lease purchase for Emergency One. I think it's a fire truck, not a fire engine. I hope it was an engine. Oh, I always get that wrong. Sorry. Fire engine. A little more detail on the police department items. We have the 2 new additional police officer positions coupled with the 3 CSOs and the 2 communication operators in the dispatch operation. In this item here, there is a police officer and a parking control officer for whom we received special revenues or grant funds. Those funds have gone away, and so now the general fund needs to support those positions to maintain staffing at current levels, animal contract increases, some increases for the aircraft, the helicopter program, to make sure that the aircraft are upgraded and in good working condition. Also, an additional fuel allowance for an additional 1,000 hours of air support. Upgrades to computers and technology, new vehicles, 26 new vehicle purchases, the lobby security project to enhance the police department's lobby and their security there, and then various other smaller changes for a combined total of about $3 million in new funding. In the fire department, there is the lease, I got it right here. For the fire engine, the permanent increase for the junior lifeguard program and standards of cover. There is an increase in the Metro City's JPA budget, medical billing contract increases for our ambulance services, some equipment and supplies, the improvement of, I believe it's 2 of our lifeguard towers, refurbishing oil wells, which the fire department oversees, some mobile data computer units to improve performance in the field, and then the Fire Station 8 at Heil, a renovation there for that fire station for about $1 million in total. In terms of quality of life enhancements in this budget, there is a retitling of the planning and building department to community development to have more of a community development type of focus. There's a deputy director position that's established. There's no net increase in the table of organization. There is 1.5 FTE decrease to offset this. So 1.5 positions will be eliminated to accommodate this position for net neutral effect. The budget also provides additional funding to improve the beach going experience. And so we have new trash enclosures that are included, as well as additional restroom cleaning during the off-peak periods, since our beaches are such a main attraction. The budget also increases funding for tree trimming, primarily for the new prevailing wage increases that must be paid. And there are some significant renovations here for the library, in particular the central library interior, the entry doors, replacing 70 of the obsolete computers that are here that the public uses extensively, and increasing the materials budget as well for additional books, and also sand replenishment at Huntington Harbor beaches. And these, again, this is not an all-inclusive list, it's some of the major highlights. In the area of economic and financial sustainability, the budget still continues our commitment to the three-pronged approach to reduce our unfunded liabilities. And so we still have the same amount of funding for the retiree medical plan, the 25-10, where we shortened the amortization period for that unfunded liability from the 25 to 10 years. Same for retiree supplemental, and so those are pretty static there. And we funded another $1 million for the CalPERS 1=5, where we could add $1 million a year in contributions to the safety plan at PERS in order to shrink the amortization period by 5 years, saving taxpayers combined for these three programs about $54 million. It also provides full funding for our workers' comp costs. It includes about $250,000 to further reduce our workers' comp liability, and I'm pleased to announce here, this last year for workers' comp, our liability was about $10.5 million. We've been able to bring it down to 9.2, which is manageable. And we're hoping that these plans will be discussed them with our rating agency when we're up for renewal of our credit rating. These are the plans I usually tout with them that help to get us the AAA rating that we receive from Fitch. Also, to ensure compliance with a myriad of federal and state guidelines and rules and laws, we're also recommending a senior payroll technician position be added in the payroll unit. In addition, $210,000 is included for some of the tax sharing agreements that we have for sales tax with Pinnacle Petroleum, and then the hotel tax agreement with Visit HB. That's based on TOT growth and revenue projections. In terms of the status of our reserves, you'll see that they remain stable, which is great, from $54 million last year audited and the year prior. For well, here's 13-14, sorry, we were able to increase by $61 million here, mostly for some of these contributions for the CalPERS rate increases. We created this reserve. We also set money aside for the City View replacement of that system. And so for the year that was just audited and ended as of September 30th, we had $61 million in reserves, but we will spend down some of these, which we planned to, for one-time purposes. For the senior center, we also paid $1 million towards the CalPERS 1=5 plan. And so we're expecting that for the current fiscal year, we'll end at about $54 million, which is our base of reserves. This category here is the one that the rating agencies look at the most, this $25 million. It's still not at 2 months of expenditures, which is the goal. That number is closer to $35 million. And so still a little ways away from that, but with a base of $54 million, it's a solid network to protect us from unanticipated consequences, if you will. In the area of CIP and infrastructure, the all funds budget for the CIP is $27.5 million. Just to make sure that we're on the same page with nomenclature, the CIP program incorporates many funding sources. So a portion of the CIP is the general fund, grants, Measure M, which is sales tax based, the TIF, water funds, sewer funds. Prop 42 is very, very small. It was a larger component of it, but it has been cut by the state. And then gas tax, which can be used for street repairs, etc. And so for all of these funding sources combined, there's about a $27.5 million capital program planned for next year, and that detail is in the larger 500-page book, but it does have its own section, and it's actually very easy to read. because it's based by project and it gives you specifics on each initiative. There are continuing appropriations for the senior center, so we would continue the funding for that for any amounts yet not spent. Some of the highlights include the Warner Avenue gravity sewer improvement, again, the police department lobby, security enhancement project, pier piling, cleaning and maintenance there, and then arterial roadways, dam replenishment, concrete improvements, which are the sidewalks, campground expansion at Sunset Vista, and other projects. Also in terms of the park improvements, Clegg Stacy playground improvement is also included to replace the 25-year-old equipment there and to meet ADA requirements. We wanted to switch the conversation to infrastructure because the CIP is all funds. The infrastructure requirement that's in the charter relates specifically to general fund contributions for infrastructure, and it's based on a 5-year rolling average. The general fund, we calculate this separately. The separate calculation that's done in addition to the budget does exceed the 15% requirement for 15-16. It contains about $35.1 million in combined funding among all the departments, but primarily public works for infrastructure improvements and maintenance, and includes about $3.2 million of that $35 million is for new capital projects for arterial roadways, about $1 million for some street improvements there, dam replenishment, etc. The roadway projects that will undergo as part of the infrastructure spending will help to maintain our PCI of 76, which is a good PCI. I recall when we were down at 71 just a few years ago, so this is a great improvement. So what are some of the challenges and opportunities? I'm going to wrap this up here. We do have additional funding coming from the state, about $1.6 million by the end of this year, and $4.5 million coming next year. Here are some recommendations. These aren't exhaustive or all-inclusive, and the council may have different recommendations, but if we are to receive just the one-time funding from the state, mostly related to the unwinding of the same triple flip I mentioned earlier, here are some suggestions on how to make a larger down payment on some things in order to reduce annual debt service costs in the future. So not financing the fire truck and fire engine is an option. Paying a portion of our 800 megahertz project outright instead of financing the full $9 million. Utilizing some of the funds to do our citywide streetlight retrofit instead of financing the entire cost. And or combination of all these, creating a Section 115 trust to continue expediting paying down unfunded liabilities, which will free up funding in the annual budgets because our annual contributions will come down for the smaller plans, not for hers, for the smaller plans. Unfunded liabilities overview here. So our CalPERS unfunded liability is $308.2 million based on the last actuarial report received from PERS. We're at about a 69.7% funded status, so still not at 70%. The 1=5 plan, where we deposit $1 million more every year, specifically for the safety portion of the plan, which if we continue that for the next 25 years, we will have saved taxpayers about $54 million there. The miscellaneous plan is business as usual. In the retiree medical area, if you look at the capper, you'll see a $5.9 million unfunded liability, but we did pay that off as of September 30th, so the next capper will show hopefully zero to a very small amount in that category. But then a new unfunded liability will come in due to a new actuarial standard. We will have to recognize the unfunded liability for our HEMCA, or a safety-related retiree medical program, and we'll pay that off over 10 years. Our retiree supplemental plan is at 62% funded status. This used to be 42 or 43% just a few years ago, just about 4 years ago. So we've made significant improvements there. And then workers' compensation was 10.5, is down to 9.2, so improving there. The next capper for the next fiscal year should show reductions in retiree medical and it's probably retiree supplemental. These are our FTEs versus our year-over-year PERS costs. You can see that our PERS costs are still increasing even though, so you see it's a pretty steep climb, and which will continue even though our staffing is less. And so we're still not at pre-recession levels in terms of staffing, we're well under, but our pension costs continue to rise. And I'll skip right to, well, here's an important point. You've seen the slides where we show the increases over the next few years. There is one important caveat here. CalPERS, in addition to the 4 changes they've already implemented, they're thinking of yet other changes to make to increase contributions in the plan. They believe their 7.5% estimated annual earnings rate is too high. They believe it increases the volatility of the plan. They want to reduce the volatility of their portfolio, which means if you're not earning 7.5% in the market, and you're not taking the risk in your portfolio choices and your investments to achieve that, then all employers will need to add contributions in. This is a very important change. They're still talking about it. There's a meeting in August that I may go to Sacramento to participate in the discussions about, but even just a 50 basis points change, going from 7.5% to 7%, would be about $3.5 million for us per year. It's a very significant change if PERS goes down this path, and very costly. Here's a projection of our PERS rates over the next few years. You'll see that it's almost a doubling by the time we get to 21-22, and that's before the volatility index gets introduced, if the board so chooses. And so we'll have significant cost increases. This is the annual cost on an all funds basis that's built into the 15-16 budget, and then you see the ramp up from there. So very significant increases. We're expecting that any revenue enhancements over the next few years, just improve the economy if there is, would have to go towards paying these costs first. So just to recap here, the budget increases funding for public safety services. It essentially adds 5 police officers to sworn duties through the creative funding approach. It also provides funding for quality of life enhancements at our libraries and beaches. It eliminates 2 of the city's 3 retirement and funded liabilities in 10 years, so we're continuing those plans. Also funds infrastructure improvements to the roadways and parks, and exceeds the 15% requirement, and enhances compliance with laws and regulations, promoting for financial sustainability and long-term viability. Here's our budget calendar. We introduced the budgets to the council last week. We're here today on July 13th. There'll be another opportunity to hear more about the budget on July 20th. August 17th, we'll give a 5-year projection, a long-term financial plan. And then September 8th is the first opportunity for a council public hearing and budget adoption, with the 21st being the alternate, all in anticipation of the new fiscal year beginning October 1. That concludes my presentation. And before I forget, because I'll kill myself later, I wanted to just highlight my staff that worked so hard on this budget. We have Carol Molina Espinoza in the back. She's our budget manager. She was really dedicated. Joshua Rosenbaum and Paulina Flores, they're also on the budget team, and just put in many, many, many hours for you to have what you have in the budget and all of the recommendations that we presented to you today. So thanks again to the team.
Any questions? Sure. On the 10.3 million you had for our TOT, is that our money after we get the tax return or before?
It's before, so it's the gross amount that's booked in the revenue.
What's the percentage we give to?
It's 10.
10? Okay. Also, the 2% labor adjustment, what is that?
So we built into the budget and across the board 2% labor adjustment as a placeholder, because our contracts are all expiring as of September 30th.
And that was negotiated?
No.
So why are we creating the council?
Well, we discussed this, I recall.
Yeah, and I asked the question. That's where I got an answer.
It's a placeholder, that's all, starting point. But the preliminary budget, we start with something.
We don't.
We've been very careful in talking about transparency and making sure we do everything right, and this is preempting us right up. I mean, you can budget it as a surplus or something else, but just saying that, you're preempting negotiation.
Well, again, for budget purposes, we've got something. in the
We
budget.
can put it somewhere else and we know that we'll have to pull from somewhere or it's a surplus. I just don't think it's,
Just the way it's labeled in your code.
yeah.
I think Gloria and her staff. All right, we're ready now to proceed on what you're going to be doing in the next 6 months in terms of your strategic plan. And I think that this presentation that Gloria always makes before you make your recommendations is important. What you're going to do is you're going to have 30 minutes in your small groups, and you'll be drafting objectives for the next 6 months, and then when you come back to the large group, it's the city council only this time. This is a change. That we'll be going through the objectives and deciding whether those objectives are what they want to have. The objectives relate to each goal. Gail, do you mind putting up just some of those? So you're going to see that she's got where you have goals, 5 goals stated from. And if you develop your objectives, then and give them to us during that 30-minute period, then they'll be put up here, and we will have the group review. So what we're going to be doing now is we've already reviewed the 3-year goals. I took that out of the process. But for the objectives are very specific and measurable, and I'll put this over here so that Gail sees them. The latest date for any of them will be January 15th, and each objective has to have a date, and don't put them all January 15th, you're going to phase them in. Who's going to be accountable, and if it's a management team member, it's their position. If it's the mayor or council, you use their name. If there's more than 2 people that are going to be accountable, you need to have the lead. If you have a group of people that are responsible for an objective and you don't indicate a lead to be the convener and to report in monthly the progress, then usually there's not a whole lot that gets done. So if there's 2 people, the 2 of them can work it out and be monitoring and reporting out. And then make sure that you have a specific measurable outcome. Now, what you're going to be doing first, would you all just hit your matrices, because you need those right now. And in fact, could I borrow one? There was, great, thank you, Joe. What you're going to do first is the group is going to, you're going to review the objectives that were done previously. Now, you need to review those whether they're done or they're not done, because it brings up to speed the group on what's already been done and what's in process. So when you look at the first one, if you're working on improved quality of life, there's 2 of them that at least a month ago, they were still on target. What they will decide, the small group, what they will recommend, not decide, what they will recommend is whether or not those go forward. And in strategic planning, nothing is set in concrete. And so if an objective has been worked on and you don't think that's the best use of your time, then you don't give it to Gail and me to put up here. And then if you do think it's a good, yes, that's moving forward, that seems to be appropriate to accomplishing this goal, then you're going to need a recorder in each group. And the recorder could just draw a line through the date and put a new date on it and hand it to us. You don't have to bother writing it all over again. On the other hand, if you reword the objective, reword the people's name, we'll have you put that on a 3x5 card to give to us. Because it's very hard to work with it if there's writing this all over this sheet. So the first thing, and you're only reviewing the goal that you're working on. Each group has its own goal. So review the prior objectives before you write any new objectives. The new objectives, if needed, you're going to have to put on a 3x5 card. So what you're going to do is 1 goes on per card. And oh, by the way, when you do the carryovers, you notice there's 2 here. And if you decide to carry both of them over, as soon as you decide to carry over one of them, hand it to Gail or me. We do not want you to waste your time, even if we were lasting until 3. We don't want you to sit there and have to watch us write. So let's say you give it to, you get done with it, you give it to us, and then the recorder looks on somebody else's sheet. And then when you decide on the second one, then you turn that in. So the key is that you're turning them in and not giving them to us in batches. With the new objective 1 on a 3x5 card, I'll bring that around to you. Use this format. Note a key word from the goal instead of writing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which begins to make people think that it's in order, or A, B, C, D, E. just put life or infrastructure, financial, safety, and service. Just put that at the top of the card. Now, why that's important is that you've gotten really fast at what are the objectives. Suddenly we have a fistful of objectives. We don't have any idea where it goes. Then we have to ask all of you to stop and find out where did this objective goes. So be sure you put label it so we know, and then turn it in as soon as it's done. So the process is this. Step number 1, get a recorder who's going to write legibly. We're going to move this over, way up here. It'll stick because it's very heavy. And the first thing, you get a recorder. We'll bring the 3x5 cards to you. Step number 2, review the prior objectives. Don't write objectives first, new ones first, because you need to see how much work are we carrying over. And remember, you are not fully staffed in terms of your needs. So keep that in mind all the time. Every objective that you write needs to be SMART. We use this acronym every time we do this. So every objective needs to be SMART. S means specific and hopefully strategic. A strategy is an approach to get a desired result. Every objective, orange peel walls. M is measurable. If you can't measure it, it's not an objective. So by such and such a day, the department head will recommend it to city council for action. You can't say for approval, that would be in conflict with the Brown Act, because it wasn't on the agenda as an item. Or you can say for consideration. Such and such presented to the council, you've got a date. Or by a certain date, there will be 3 community workshops on something. Just make sure it's measurable. A is attainable, and here's the one that you've already talked a lot about. Attainable means, do you have the resources? That means people, that means money, that means equipment. If you don't have it, and you're not going to have it by January, then don't write the objective. You don't want to set up yourself to fail. R is relevant. Relevant means the objective is not just busy work. One of my husband's favorite quotes is never confuse motion to progress. You can be moving, standing still. So be sure that it's relevant. And then last but not least, timely. Is the timing right? And is there time to do it? So as you're drafting your objectives, you need to keep these criteria in mind so that it'll be doable. So review again, get the recorder, we'll give you the card, review the prior objectives one at a time. Don't give us 2 or 3 all at once, one at a time. And then new ones, put on a 3x5 card, be sure and label it with a word that relates to your goal. What questions do you have about process?
Marilyn, we do have some topics.
Oh, thank you, I forgot about that. I understand you have some topics. And so look at that list. Does everybody have that list?
Yeah, in the agenda.
Okay, in the agenda, look, if there's a topic there that relates to the goal you're writing, then that means it's there for you to consider writing an objective around that topic. So be sure you look at that and see which particular questions might be relevant.
benefit of the public, or is the topic list too long?
The public, it's under, I believe it's under age, and then it lists topics to be discussed. So if you have an agenda, which they're in the back there, it lists about 8 different items under age.
So the idea is not to sit there and talk a lot about the topic, because it'll use up your 30 minutes. But instead, look at it and say, does this relate to our goal as a possible objective? And then the group decides whether or not that needs to be turned into an objective. Thank you, Fred, because I've never had that list before, so I didn't have it in my head. Anything else? All right, it's now 10:30. You have till 11. Typically, there's usually about 3 to 5 carryovers. Every 10 minutes, I'll tell you an objective should be coming in so that you don't get bogged down. So just circle your group, and if Kathleen wants to listen, you can pull your chair closer to them.